Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, welcome. Good to have all of you with us today. As always, we sincerely appreciate you joining us on this Sunday afternoon. And we, of course, hope that you are able to maintain your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health during these times. And we welcome you today for this very critical topic, land and equals power. And this is not a topic that received a whole lot of interest. Like, we're really thankful, Shakur and I, and our organization, because we receive every week a large number of people tune in to this broadcast, and we are humbled and appreciative of that. This particular topic didn't generate the same level of excitement that, for example, the topic we have already scheduled for next week, organization versus mobilization. That one there is we just launched the page yesterday, and it's already 200 something people signed up. But the reason why I think that is about today's event is because people don't really, I think for two reasons. One, people don't really understand the importance of land in the struggle for justice. And two, just being perfectly honest, most people don't really believe that we will be successful in getting land back. Most of you don't believe that. When we say our objective is Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa, most of you don't believe that'll ever happen. Most of you don't believe that the indigenous people here will ever get this land back. And because you don't believe that, and I understand why you don't believe it, there's nothing you've been taught, nothing you see in this society that even addresses that injustice around land theft. And there's certainly nothing that raises up the ability, our ability to organize and get our land back. So there's no reason why anybody would just automatically, understand and believe in those types of things. It's not like you can turn on a movie on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, and it's going to show African people rising up and taking land back, or indigenous people doing the same. That's never the case. So we understand that, but at the same time, we think, the way that we combat that is by addressing it head on. So that's why we're having this topic. And in doing so, we, of course, honor the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere whose land we sit on and who we are committed to assisting in every way possible to get this land back. It belongs to them. It doesn't belong to us. Just like what you own belongs to you. And if somebody stole it, you would want it back. They want their land back, you all, regardless of what your position is in relationship to that, what you bought here or occupied or whatever. It doesn't belong to us. So we acknowledge them and the fact that this is their land. And we want them to have their justice, because we want justice for ourselves. And you can't want justice for yourself and not want it for other people. That's what's called hypocrisy and a contradiction. So we have to be consistent in that regard. And we, of course, honor our African ancestors who fought from day one of our oppression to ensure that our quality of life could be raised to the highest level that they can get it, and have always done that. And I just saw that Gloria Richardson had passed away. And if you don't know who she is, you should research Gloria Richardson. She was one of the very first proponents, activists around the concept of Black power in the 1960s in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She was an organizer affiliated with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and she did an outstanding work organizing a revolutionary community defense project there against police terrorism and terrorism of the state against our people. And she was in her 90s and just passed away. So, you're not going to learn about Gloria Richardson. All you're going to learn about from this capitalist media is Floyd Mayweather and LeBron and Jay-Z and Beyonce. You're never going to learn about anybody who put their life on the line fighting for our advancement as people. So respect to Gloria Richardson, who is now one of those ancestors who laid her life on the line, fighting for our forward progress. And so with that, we'll go ahead and engage in our introductions and get the topic underway. As always, I am a longtime organizer for the All African People's Revolutionary Party, a mass, independent, revolutionary, Pan-African political party that is based in Africa. And I have had the privilege and honor to spend the last 3+ decades in this organization, working to build the organization in probably about 15, 20 different countries, most on the African continent, and am honored to make that contribution. And certainly here on this slave plantation I inhabit right now. And joining me is my amazing daughter, outstanding daughter, Shakura, who grew up in the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute, and then she has gone on, as most of our children have, to engage in consistent activism for a better world. She's a devoted activist in the city where she lives, although she's here visiting now for this month, and glad to be able to spend this time with her. But she's finishing out her doctorate in teaching undergraduate students and engaging in activist work. So just honored to be able to do this every week with her. And again, I mentioned the objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, Pan-Africanism, which the definition of Pan-Africanism, our definition, is the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. And if you look on the right, the book, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah, in that book, he calls for the creation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And he defines that as a product of the All African Committee for Political Coordination, which is all Pan-African revolutionary formations on the ground in Africa fighting for the same objective, one unified socialist Africa. So I realize most of you, well, that'll never happen, but that's because but then as soon as you say that, we have to acknowledge that you probably haven't read one book about Pan-Africanism. In fact, I know you haven't. So if you don't know anything about the movement, then you're not qualified to say whether it'll happen or not, especially talking to someone like me that spent my whole life in that movement around African people all throughout Africa, all throughout Europe, all throughout the Caribbean, Canada, all throughout the United Snakes of America. So I'm sure you understand that we're not being arrogant when we say, you really don't know enough about this to form an opinion. You should get involved and study. And if you did, you would know that, like, the logos of you see here are actual organizations of millions of people each one, hundreds of thousands of people each one, who have accepted this objective, one unified socialist Africa, accepted the call of Kwame Nkrumah to unite all Pan-African formations into one. And I've done work with every one of these organizations listed here, many of them in the countries they exist in. So this is the work that we're doing. And this is what we represent. And we have chapters everywhere and relationships with other liberation movements, especially those that are fighting for their land back, the Palestinian people in occupied Palestine, or what you call Israel, stolen land. The Filipino people fighting for national liberation in the Philippines. The Irish people fighting for national liberation in Ireland, stolen land by the British. And of course, the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, who, if you're in the Western Hemisphere right now, you're sitting on land that was stolen from them. So we stand in solidarity and do a lot of actual work with all of those communities that we just mentioned, and we'll continue to do so. So that's a perfect segue to get into our topic today, land equals power. And to get us started, I will turn it over to Shakura.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna carry you with me as I go figure out why my dog is so upset, so forgive the barking. But I do want to start off by saying that I hope that you all continue to take care of yourselves and make sure that you are doing what you need to do so that you can get through what you need to get through. And I also hope that you understand that today's objective is really, as all objectives, to help you grow and learn so that you can be a better person and individual. So we're asking for you to have an open mindset. We're asking for you to have a growth mindset. And we're asking for you to be ready to possibly be uncomfortable because we're hoping to teach you some things that are going to reverse what you thought you already understood and had already mastered. Okay. So, with that being said, the objective today is to talk about land, who controls it and who doesn't, why it matters. Kwame Nkrumah advanced a concept within the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare called liberated zones. This concept speaks to three categories of human existence as it relates to land ownership. There is enemy held territories where the enemy, i.e., the capitalist imperialist system, controls the land and people. The second category is contested zones. In this area, the enemy is still in control, but the people are challenging the power of the ruling classes, and in some instances, may control some of the territory within the controlled land basis. Finally, there is liberated zones where the masses of people have wrest control. Where the mass of people have wrest control of the land from the enemy classes. We suggest that the example of the three categories are the US and call capitalist dominated countries the overwhelming majority of the planet are enemy held territories. And examples of the contested zones would be places like Western Sahara in Northern Africa, or maybe places like Libya or Iraq, Afghanistan, to name a few. Liberated zones would be best exemplified by socialist Cuba. With Nkrumah's analysis in mind, the question for today is how this phenomenon impacts the world today and how we can go from less liberated zones to the majority of the world being liberated, which in translation would mean the majority of the world being socialist. And I want us to just take a moment to really think about what that means. Instead of us operating off of the broken system that we're operating off of currently, what we're suggesting is using Nkrumah's analysis to help us think about how, if we all had a different approach, a socialist approach, what would that mean in terms of how we think about land? What would that mean in terms of how we think about our identity as it relates to the land that we stand on or the land that we would like to call our home? Okay, what does that mean for us? Next slide, please, from a socialist standpoint. Think about that. Okay, the fact that capitalist imperialists are in power everywhere and they control all the land is no accident, because as the title of this workshop indicates, land equals power. It equals power because land contains all of the natural resources required to supply all of the needs for humanity in terms of what we need to exist and what we need to develop. The food comes from the land. The water comes from the land. Just those things alone ensure that whoever controls the land will control society. On top of that, the resources required to create the mechanisms for human society to evolve and function come from the land. All technological advances can be traced to their origination being tied to the land. And from the standpoint of the masses of people, beyond governing mechanisms also, the land represents unmatched spiritual value. It's people's connection to the planet and higher levels of the spirit world that people believe in. There is so much true that the enemy's control of land serves as a primary weapon in controlling the masses of people's spiritual resistance. And when I think about this slide, the previous one as well, but specifically this one, I think about that title you see at the top, Controlling Land Equals Controlling Life. And I happened to just check Spotify today because I was interested in listening to some speeches by Malcolm X. And I found a whole list of speeches on Spotify. So if you have Spotify and you're interested in learning more about Malcolm X, you should definitely type his name in and check it out. But one of the titles of his speeches was called, "You Can't Hate the Roots of a Tree Without Hating the Tree Itself." And he literally goes into what I just talked about. He talks about how basically we are socialized as a system to not respect Africa. And because we don't respect Africa, we don't respect the minerals, the materials, the resources that all come from Africa. By default, why would we respect the people that also originate from Africa? It's very, very deep if you really, really think about it. And so as we continue to put that in perspective, I just want to say that I remember, Daddy, you might remember this story, but I believe I was 15 or 16, young and dumb and just trying to be based on capitalist white supremacist standards. And I remembered asking him, I think for a pair of diamond earrings or something. And his response to me, I might have asked my mom for the same gift. I can't even remember now, but their response to me was consistent and the same. And what they said was, first, no, we're not buying that for you because, that's not how you engage yourself with the struggle. You need to figure out a more collective way to represent what you think is beauty by still making sure that you're not oppressing other people who are working on the continent as we speak in the landmines to pull those diamonds out. Yes, they did have that deep analysis conversation with me at the age of 15 because that's how I was raised. The secondary point they made was, have you ever even stopped to think about where those diamonds are coming from? And I hadn't thought about it. I don't know if many of you know where diamonds come from, that you wear the rubber from your cars and your pencil erasers, where all these resources come from. My dad talks about the battery that is used in all of these electronic devices and how that originates from the continent of Africa. So when we really start to think about how we literally as a society are dependent on three main resources that I just mentioned, the engagement of jewelry and diamonds, this engagement of rubber and the materials that can be made from it, the shoes, our tennis shoe soles, all of that comes from those rubber trees, the tires on our cars, our bicycles, and then last but not least, this idea of how we think about the minerals to battery power our devices. How can we not pay homage and respect Africa when we depend on those things? And I'm talking life or death, because, if you don't have rubber, then that means your whole way of life changes instantly. If you don't have access to that mineral that powers your devices, your whole life changes instantly, especially now that a lot of us have to have more of screen time because we're working from our slaves, from our houses, and still trying to figure out how do we keep the bills on, which means still engaging in work that requires longer time for us to be on the screen. So the point I'm making to you is just think about all of that. And if you need a refresher, I'll reread this last sentence. It's the people's connection to the planet and higher levels of the spirit world that people believe in. There is so much true that the enemy's control of land, meaning we don't have ownership of that because we don't control it. So the enemy's control of land serves as a primary weapon in controlling the masses of people's spiritual resistance. And as our brother Malcolm said, you cannot hate the roots of a tree without hating the tree itself. And I would argue that the tree in his speech, because he did refer to Africa quite a few times, is the mechanism and the analogy that he's arguing. We need to make sure that we think about how we value the continent, and then how does that metamorphosize into how we value Africans. The same thing for indigenous people. How do we value or not value the land that we are on right now, if you consider yourself in one of the Americas? And then how does that transcribe to how you treat indigenous people? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shakura. And I just want to build on the point you were just expounding on, because I think it's very important. I think that if people don't believe, for example, that indigenous people will one day have control of this land that we're on right now, then it's impossible for me to see how you can say you respect indigenous people, because this is what they have made clear they need to engage their development as a people. This is what they have made clear that they are fighting for. So if you just dismiss that, like, yeah, I'm in California, or I'm in New York, or I'm in Oregon, or wherever, and I bought this house, or I rent this place, and this I paid for it, so it's mine, and that's just your basic mindset, and you don't really seriously think about on a consistent basis that, yeah, this land was stolen from these people and they have a right to get it back. Then by default, you're saying that you don't really believe in those people. if you're African or if you're not African, if you're European or whatever, like someone asked me the other day, why do you call white people Europeans? This was a European that asked me this. And I think they wanted to ask me why I call myself African, because I had on a ball cap that said African, but they didn't want to ask that, is my assumption. So they asked me because we were having a discussion, and instead of saying white people, I say Europeans. And he said, well, why do you call us? He said, well, what do you mean, real Europeans? And I'm like, you are a real European. Well, I was born in Alameda County here in the Bay Area, and I'm like, yeah, you're still a real European. Identity is not defined just based on where you were born. It's defined based on your history and and your culture and all of those things. You're European. I said, because he had been talking to me about how as Americans, I'm like, so just like that is a clear demonstration of how European you are, because Europeans colonized this land, and then the whole concept is that it's okay. That was a normalized thing that was supposed to happen. It's good. That's the reason why they have you celebrate Thanksgiving, to normalize this theft of land, of indigenous land. So I said, so we call you Europeans because we're not going for that nonsense. And we're telling you that you're people of Europe who are the descendants of the people who stole this land. And that's who you are. So you can't be an American because there's no such thing. The only thing you are is a person from Europe that's descended from Europe who's here in the indigenous people's land. Just like I'm an African here in the indigenous people's land. So this is the kind of analysis, and he was shocked. Like, he didn't really say another word after that. And that's typical, right? Because nobody has these types of conversations, and we're not supposed to have these types of conversations. The conversation we're supposed to have is that we're all Americans. This is this land is your land. This land is, that's the ridiculous conversation that you and I are supposed to have. And we refuse to have that because that's not the truth. So they don't want us to know how important land is, controlling of land is to forward progress. And that's the point that we have to make essential. We didn't talk before this, but Shakur mentioned Malcolm, and I have him here in this point, and it makes perfect sense because Malcolm was one of the best articulators we've had in talking about the importance of land and the fact that African people who are disconnected from Africa have no real potential to achieve collective power. That you cannot name one people in the world today who have collective power who are disconnected from their land base. There isn't any people like that. You want to talk about what Asian people are doing? That's all connected to their land base. You want to talk about what other people are doing? It's all connected to their land base. I don't care if they're here in California, it's still connected to the land that they originate from in some way, form, or fashion, whether it's how they acquired their initial resources, their level of tactical support, whatever it is, it's connected to their land base. We're the only people here on the plantation who think we're going to have collective freedom just by communicating with the slave master, just by playing in the slave master system. That when you think of it like that, because that's really the only way that it needs to be thought about, it's absolutely absurd. And it shouldn't be any question why we continue to be in the situation we're in. And if you're white and you're listening here, you're not a part of the ruling class, and you never will be. So that's why you're in the situation you're in, because you have allowed them to convince you that this is your land, this is your country, and all you have to do is just wait for your milk and honey to come through. If you just keep working for capitalism, working your hands to the bone, you will get your just rewards at some point. The master will give you your rewards. And they have convinced the majority of white people of that message so completely that here you have all these white people here. I went by yesterday to look at them down at the state capitol here. It's a stolen election. They're losing America. You should. Yeah, you're losing it. You just ain't losing it to the people that you need to lose it to yet. But that's going to happen. But this is the nonsense that they've convinced people of. So, when Malcolm talks about understanding the foundation of land, what he's talking about digs into what Shakura mentioned before. You know, land contains all of the resources we need to sustain ourselves and develop as a people. And in order for us to continue to do that, we have to have the connection to land. We can't even have a drink of water without there being a connection to land. We can't grow food. Food doesn't come from Safeway or Kroger's or Fred Meyer. It comes from the land. So land is essential. So, you know, I remember years ago, I went to hear Minister Farrakhan speak, and he said, I was in my 20s. I went to hear him speak in Oakland, and he said, if the white man closed the supermarkets today, it would be a brown day in Oakland. And of course, the crowd, you know, everybody cracked up. But I never forgot the poignancy of his point in that we don't control any of the mechanisms that we need to sustain ourselves and advance as a people. And, you know, I lived in Portland many years, and, you know, I got so sick of listening to these white anarchists talk about going out and getting a patch of land and that being a solution. Like, our oppression, maybe that might work for them. You know, that's their thing. But our oppression as African people didn't happen on an individual basis. It happened collectively. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a person that I could afford to go out and buy some land. I could do that. I could realistically do that right now. But that would not solve our people's problem. That would just create more comfort for me. And I'm not saying people don't have a right to be comfortable, but I'm saying if that's what you're trying to do, then just say that. I just want to get comfort for myself, because what that model is doing nothing to advance the masses of suffering, the masses of our people endure. So this is what Malcolm was talking about when he talked about land and resources, that we have to understand that we at all times have to be connected to the land. We have to be connected to the resources. We have to do that for dialectical and material reasons. And as Shakur mentioned, we have to do it for spiritual reasons, because the land is a major element of our culture and our history as a people, of our spiritual development. And so we look to the land for our spiritual growth. That's why when you're stressed out and upset and you go sit by the river or you go to the ocean, that's why you feel better, because your spiritual health is connected to the land. So this is why we're saying land being liberated is so important, because it's an essential element in people being able to be liberated. And that's the part that most of us are missing. We don't understand that. And we have allowed our enemies to convince us that we don't have to be that concerned about land. All we have to do is just vote in the master system, and we'll get what we need to liberate ourselves by voting in his system. And you cannot name one oppressed people who have voted their way to freedom and liberation in history. I challenge you to name one people who have voted their way under the system their enemies control to freedom and justice. That has never happened, you all, and it never will happen. That's a scam that's being projected onto you by the people who control us, who only want us to do nothing that will sabotage their interests. Now, when we start organizing around land liberation, that sabotages their interests. So they don't want, that's why they don't want you to even think about that. They want you to keep thinking that all you have to do is look at them. And this picture here should be an inspiration. It is for me. It's the land and freedom movement, or what you know as the Mau Mau movement in Kenya. They were fighting for land back in Kenya, driving the European colonizer out of Kenya in the 50s and 60s. All of the Mau Mau, so-called Mau Mau, Fred Bukau and Dedan Kimathi, they were leading a movement to do that. And they were successful enough to push for independence. But you know, again, the capitalist system is resilient. So they were able to circle back around and develop this system of neo-colonialism to ensure that even if they're not physically in Africa anymore, because groups like Land and Freedom ran the British out of Kenya, they still could establish the mechanisms to maintain their control over our resources and labor. That's what neo-colonialism is. We have to understand that that's what's happening. And once we can begin to develop that level of consciousness and understand the importance of land liberation and making land liberation central to our struggle for justice, then they can no longer trick us with all these things they bring in to try and trick us with. They can no longer do that, because once we know that land is the central focus of our struggle, then them telling us, well, no, you ain't got to worry about land. All you have to do is vote in the fox slave master. We'll get rid of the wolf slave master. Just vote in the fox, and then you'll be fine once you get the fox in. And Malcolm told us about the fox and the wolf, the Democrats and Republicans. He told us about that. We don't listen, but he told us about it. So clearly, once we raise our consciousness to this understanding of the importance of land liberation, their tricks are no longer going to be effective against us. I tell everybody all the time, it doesn't matter who wins their elections. It's their elections, it's not mine. Whoever wins their elections, my work remains the same: the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. Joe Biden is not going to get me any closer to that objective than Donald Trump was, than Barack Obama was, than Clinton was, then Bush was. They are all the spokespeople for the international imperialist system that dominates Africa. And as Shakura said, by dominating Africa, dominates African people. So I can receive no help from any of them. The only help coming is the help of the masses of people fighting to win our land back. So that's why we say this is necessary. And the consciousness around this land liberation struggle is so important, because once we gain that understanding, then the true respect for colonized people is possible. Until we have that consciousness around land liberation, you don't respect African people. And this is the reason why we have the reality we have today. You don't respect indigenous people. You just got through calling yourself an American, talking about you respect indigenous. No, you don't. And you're not fooling us. You might be fooling some people, but you're not fooling us. The only way that you can really respect indigenous people is by acknowledging this is indigenous land, and I need to do everything I can to support them in getting their land back. Well, who are you then? Are you an American? No, I'm a European in America fighting for justice. That's how you respect indigenous people. Well, yeah, Black people, quote unquote, you're not gonna, most of them are never gonna go back to Africa. You're not gonna, that has nothing to do with Pan-Africanism. That's just your internalized racism talking. So as long as you hold any kind of perspective like that, all you're doing is perpetuating white supremacy. And as long as you perpetuate white supremacy, all you're doing is perpetuating capitalism, because white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, these are the appendages, these are the boxing gloves for capitalism. And as long as you perpetuate capitalism, then you're perpetuating the oppression of the majority of people on earth. Nobody can refute that, not in any kind of realistic and sensible way. So the only way you can respect African people is by saying African people have the right to say they can liberate and unite their people worldwide in over 100 countries. And my role is just simply to support them in doing that. I'll never forget years ago, I had this conversation with a European, and they were telling me, you know, white Europeans go to Africa and then you can't tell them anything about Africa, right? They know everything about Africa, you know. And this guy, I was talking to him and he told me, well, I had a shirt on with Kwame Nkrumah on it. And he was like, and it said, you know, the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism must be the objective of all Black revolutionaries on earth. That's what the shirt said, with a picture of Nkrumah. So he said, Kwame, he couldn't say the name. Who is that? I said, well, it's Kwame Nkrumah. He is the founder of my political party, the All African People's Revolutionary Party. He was also the first president of Ghana. And I've been to Ghana, you know, so now his whole thing changed. Like now he's an expert on Ghana because he's been there. The fact that I've been there, I'm sure more times than him, is irrelevant, you know, because we have white supremacy. If he's been there 5 minutes, he knows more about it than the people who were born and raised there. That's just how white supremacy works. So he says, well, I've been to Ghana, and I just looked at him. I said, and so what? And he's like, well, I've never heard of Nkrumah, this guy on your shirt. And I said, well, then you didn't pay attention to much in Ghana because he, as I said, he's the first president of Ghana. That's like being here saying, I don't know, I've never heard of George Washington. Like, you know, I mean, not that George Washington is nothing but a scurvy, syphilis carrying fool, but still to be here and know this backward history, you have to know about who that is because we've had that drilled into us from day one. So, you know, that's the reality. And this guy was trying to tell me, well, I support the Ghanaian. I said, no, you don't. I said, you support what you want to do. And then as it came out, he was there for some church. And I'm like, yeah, that's the last thing Africa needs. So this was my point, is that if you really respect African people, then you would have to know something about our movements. And if you don't know anything about our movements, that does not make you a criminal, but you certainly can't be arrogant about it. And then at the same time, want us to believe that you're somebody that we can trust and respect as an accomplice in our struggle. You don't get it both ways. If you want to side with capitalism and be ignorant and arrogant about, you know, this land question, then we have to lump you where you belong, with the enemy. So, you know, the connection of land to people's liberation, whether we're talking about the African masses, the Palestinian people, the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the Irish people, the Filipino people, whoever, you know, we're all oppressed. And that oppression is not because we haven't gotten enough people out to vote. I'm so sick of hearing that. And I don't understand how most of you aren't, because it's a complete lie. Well, the reason why we don't have power is because we haven't gotten enough people out to vote. And every time we get more and more people out and we don't move 1 inch closer to power. You had all them people, you had 150 million people vote in this election in November. There's never been an election where more people voted. And I'm telling you right now, we are no closer to power today than we were before November 3rd. We already got that old slave master telling the African, leaking the video, telling the African people, slaves, stop talking about police reform and stop police. They leaked the video. They already had it from Friday. Biden telling these Sharpton and all those other Uncle Toms, telling them, well, don't even talk about police terrorism. Like you are no closer to freedom. You might feel better because you got the wolf out the way and now you got to deal with a fox instead of a wolf, and you're not as stressed around the fox because he's not as aggressive, I guess, in your mind. I don't know what that is, but you are no closer to solving the problem with what you did, not 1 inch closer. So don't talk to me about that. No, I don't participate in it. I never will participate in it because it has nothing to do with liberation and justice for humanity. So land is that critical question. That's what's missing in the equation in terms of our ability to get what we need, control over that. And this capitalist system prevents us from connecting to land, because if we understand the importance of land, then we're no longer satisfied just to have a Mercedes-Benz, because we now understand, wait a minute, the steel that made the body of the Benz, the zinc that bent the steel, that made the body, the lithium that powers the battery, the phosphates that make the lights, the whatever you call those lights that glow differently, the gas that runs the car, the rubber that makes the tires, all of that stuff, the aluminum that, you know, the plastics, all of that stuff comes from Africa. So they can say it's a German car or an American car, it's an African car. We just don't control it. And once you understand that, you can no longer be happy just having the car. You can no longer be happy having the newest iPhone when you know that the mineral that controls or powers the iPhone comes from Africa. Now you want to control the whole cell phone industry, the whole laptop industry, as you should, because it belongs to you. You just don't have control over it right now. You want to have that. When you understand this land connection, then you can't just be here trying to beg your slave master for a job, and you got all kind of jobs waiting for you in Africa. But you don't even have a passport because you're afraid to step outside the comfort zone on a plantation, as if it's possible to have a comfort zone on a plantation. Dig that. That's our consciousness right now. I've had people tell me that I'm afraid to travel to Africa. That's who Malcolm talked about. You want to escape from this plantation, from this good white man? All this good food we got? That's the person that today is saying, I'm afraid. You're the 21st century version of what Malcolm was talking about. And that's what we have to work with people to correct, so that we can understand where our real power base is. Now, this picture here is a picture of Zimbabwe. And if you don't know, since 1990 in Zimbabwe, they have been engaged in a program of land reclamation, where land that was stolen from the indigenous African people there by the European colonizers from Germany and Britain was seized by the government of the Zimbabwe African National Union, Robert Mugabe. That's why Mugabe's a demon in the Western Hemisphere, because they had the nerve to take the land back and give it back to the African people, the patriots who fought in the War of Liberation from Britain. They gave the land back to 200,000 families. And then in 1990, they didn't even let it function for 2 minutes. And they were, well, they don't know, these people aren't producing anything on the land. The white farmers were producing, making all this money. Yeah, but that money was just going in their pockets. The majority of Africans were poor. It didn't mean anything to us. So now, fast forward 30 years, and people have learned. Here you had one European, I guess he was decent enough to try to help the people learn how to, farm the land, or maybe it was just a photo op, who knows. But at any rate, over time, we learned how to do that because we were prohibited from doing it for hundreds of years. And now today, the standard of living in Zimbabwe has risen exponentially among the African masses. And maize, which is a primary food product in Zimbabwe, people have learned how to farm it and have reduced starvation significantly in the country. The capitalist media is not telling you any of this. All they're telling you is that, well, they took the land and they killed the white people. In 30 years, there have been 11 Europeans killed in this land reclamation process. 11 killed in 30 years. And those people were killed because they refused to give up the land. Well, you got to get out of here. It's not your land. You stole it. Your family, and if you didn't steal it, your daddy stole it, your mama stole it, your granddaddy, you got to go. This land is going back to the people it rightfully belongs to. And nobody said anything about the white people have to leave Zimbabwe. They're welcome to stay in Zimbabwe. They can work hard and get a job and raise themselves up by their bootstraps. They're entitled to do that. Same thing they always tell us. You can do that, but you don't get any special privileges and any special entitlements that you stole from us to do that. You do it on your own, just like everybody else. The difference being they tell us that, and there's a system of oppression preventing us from advancing, whereas in Zimbabwe, there is no system of oppression against Europeans happening there. None whatsoever. So land, you all, that's the key, because that project in Zimbabwe has created a significant amount of progress towards what we need. Of course, we will never have what we need until we have one unified socialist Africa, but it's advanced our struggle. And that's why in Azania, or what you call South Africa, now they're in the process of instituting a land reclamation program. And the indigenous people here need a land reclamation program where they get their lands. They've been fighting for that. That's what the fight against the Fort Laramie Treaty and all these treaties is about. Y'all got to study this. You don't know. You think that because you drove through racist Arizona and you saw the pit stops where they're racist articles from indigenous people, and you go in there and there's somebody just trying to have a job to feed their family and they happen to be indigenous, and you saw that and you thought, okay, well, they're doing all right. Or you went to some casino and you thought, okay, well, they're okay. It's not really that big of an issue, is it? Yeah, it is. They need their land back. They don't need no damn casino. They need all the land back. That's what they need. And that's what they deserve. That's exactly what's going to happen. So when we talk about this land question in terms of Nkrumah zonal analysis that Shakur mentioned, enemy held zones, contested zones, liberated zones. So what's needed is this question of mass organization. Like if you look at socialist Cuba, which is clearly without question a liberated zone. I mean, look at that picture. These are women soldiers in Cuba. Is there any better picture than that? There are women of all nationalities, all ages there, ready to defend their country from the enemy. And I think the important thing to understand about that is that they have mass organization there, meaning the people participate in that liberation process. That's why they're committed to it. Y'all don't understand that. You think, well, it's just Fidel, he has control over the whole. Fidel's been dead going on 5 years. And all these people were saying, once Fidel dies, I ain't heard a peep of them in almost 5 years. Once Fidel dies, Cuba, no. All the reactionaries in Miami, once Fidel dies, no. Cuba is stronger today because they have a mass liberation struggle in progress. And that's what's needed, you all, to get us what we need. I understand most of what you know about Cuba is reactionary and negative, and I get that. But you got to ask yourself the question, what have I studied about it? You haven't read a single book about it, or you haven't been engaged in any work around the Cuban embargo, any of that? Well, of course you don't know anything about it. You thought you knew because you watched CNN or CIA or something. But there is a mass liberation struggle going on there, and that's what we need. And in that mass liberation struggle, there is mass political education. We talk about it all the time, but I can tell you this: if you go to Cuba, anybody that's gone there knows what I'm about to say is correct. If you go there and you talk to people, you go to Venezuela, you go to Bolivia, and you talk to people there, those people in those countries know more about what's happening politically in the United States than most of you do. And they can articulate it clearly. Why? Because they study, and they study uncompromisingly to understand those things they study. So you have to, understand the value of that and how important that is. So you can make sure that, you're getting that necessary information to be positioned to, okay, yeah, I understand this. Now I know what steps I need to take to contribute to this struggle. Here, that looks like a lot of things. Organizations having political education, organizing revolutionary community defense projects, etc. This all leads to the question of land liberation. All of it helps us get closer to that reality. So when we have all of this, we have this mass struggle over land, the process engages us in, because we're studying, we're understanding the contradictions at work. Now we're in a position where we can begin to put real pressure on the capitalists. Just think about it. Like, we have these Black Lives Matter protests, and you didn't even know 5 minutes ago you were going, and you decided 3 minutes ago to go out to the protests, and you went out and you're in the streets, and then 2 minutes later, you didn't know anything about what the next step would be. And then 3 minutes after that, you're on the freeway, stopping the freeway, and the whole city you're in goes berserk. They can't handle the fact that you did that. And it didn't even take you 5 minutes to plan that. And you got the whole city paying attention. If that's the reality, and you're looking at, yeah, we got the whole city to pay attention, and that's all you can get out of that, you're missing the whole point. The point is, if you could do that little bit of planning, 3 minutes of planning, and not even that, just 3 minutes of spontaneous action, and you could get the whole city paying attention. Just imagine what you could do if you organized people and got people committed, organized supply lines, organized replacement frontline protesters, did all of just a little organizing work, not much. Just imagine how long you could stop commerce. You shut the freeways down so the trucks can't get through. Now the capitalists have a problem. They can't get products in their stores. And the minute they arrest people, you got people to fill their place. Even the civil rights movement, that's how they did that. You got people to fill their place. And then when they arrest them, you got people to fill their place. Now you're creating a condition where you have power and leverage against the system. Now the capitalist system is going to start wanting to listen to you. But now the people taste victory. So whereas that's enough today, where the capitalists can come and listen to you and then figure out a way to subvert whatever it is you're talking about, that's no longer going to work. And people are going to go all the way. No, they want everything. We want the land back. That's the revolution. That's all it is, you all. What I just described, that's all it is. I don't care what they told you on Fox and CNN. That's all it is what we just described, a mass liberation struggle for land. And then we can talk about, and we've had many workshops where we've talked about what that looks like once we win, you know, so we can't talk about that here today. You can go back and look at the videos if you want. But the point is, that's what we are saying needs to happen, that we need to do. But the question is, it comes back to what I said in the beginning today. You have to believe in us. You have to believe in our ability to do this. If you're walking around here, you don't believe there's going to be a liberated Africa, you don't believe that the indigenous people will get their land back, then you're the problem. You are the problem that we're facing. You have to believe in our ability to be victorious. Look at this picture closely. You can look on the faces of every one of those young people there in that picture. And what I see is that if American imperialism invades Cuba, each and every one of these people in this picture is willing to put their life on the line to defend their country. That's because they believe in what they're doing. And I see that and understand that because I believe in what we're doing. But a lot of us don't believe in anything. That's why we're not involved consistently in building anything. We'll do it for 5 minutes here, 20 minutes 2 weeks from now, maybe 16 minutes a month from now, but we do not do it consistently. And the reason why we don't is because we don't believe in anything. We don't really believe in our people. And if we don't believe in our people, then we don't believe in ourselves. And really all we believe in is the master system. That's why if we take inventory of our lives, pretty much everything that we're committed to is what the master system is putting out there. Where we're consistent with is the master system. You know, there was this brother in work study when I was first starting to try to organize work study circles in Portland when I lived up there. I started this work study, and there was one brother who, he would come every time, but he would come late, like 20, 30 minutes late. And, you know, we have criticism, self-criticism. It's a tool we use to strengthen our ability to grow collectively by addressing contradictions. So when we had criticism, self-criticism, I asked him what needs to happen to get you here on time. And he's like, well, I don't know. I got all this stuff. You know how we lie. I got all this stuff. This is what happened. Every time that happens, every single time that happens, you know, and the dude was a bus driver for the city. They call it TriMet up there. He's a bus driver, drove a bus in the city. So I said, so do you show up 20, 30 minutes late to your job every day? Well, no. I'm like, well, why don't you do that? Because according to what you're trying to tell me right now and tell us is that you got all this stuff that prevents you from being on time. So if that's true, that would be universally true. It wouldn't just be true with this, it would be true with your job and everything else. So how is it that you're able to get to work on time, but you're not able to get to this? And he's, I don't know. I'm like, well, I do. I'll tell you why. Because you don't respect our struggle for liberation. You respect the slave master's job that you report to every day. So you give them you organize your time to make sure you give them your full effort, but you don't respect us, so you don't give us that. And I said, that's a disgrace. Because I'll tell you what, I will be I'm often late to work. Because that's slavery. That's what that is. I'm never late. These seminars, these workshops are never late. Our work, the only time is when we had a technical problem, but we're always here ready to go and organize. And we've been doing this for 9 months. And we had one time where we had an issue. And that's like 50 workshops. So clearly the pattern is established that we respect you all, and we're here on time ready to do this because we respect this work. It means everything to us. And that's what I was telling this brother. If you don't believe in our people, and if how you come here late demonstrates that you don't, then I would prefer that you just not be here. Don't waste my time. Don't waste my time, because you're not even committed to it. And 2 or 3 meetings from then, he was gone. And some of you, because you have liberal ideology that dominates you, you say, well, you drove him off. That's what people have been telling me for you. You drove him off. You're a bad person. You made him. I didn't make him leave. He made himself leave, because all I did was call the contradiction out, because we're trying to build an army here, and we can't do that with people who are playing games. So all I did was call that out. You don't have to be perfect. None of us are perfect, but you do have to be sincere. You do have to be sincere. And that means you have to believe in our people and our ability to fight. You have to do that. If you don't have that, not only will we never have land liberation, but you don't need to get smug about that, because you won't even have whatever it is you think you're fighting for. You won't even have that. You won't have equitable education in the capitalist education system. You won't achieve that. You won't have prison reform. You won't have police reform. You won't have none of the stuff that you're fighting for. Because whatever it is, you have to believe in the people. And if your faith is in the institutions of oppression and not in the masses of people, you'll never make progress that way. And the only way that you'll develop that faith is by working with the people and developing the mechanisms you need to understand why the people are in the condition they're in. Because if you don't study that, you'll think the people are in that condition because of themselves. All the time we hear this in the African community. Well, our problem is that we don't know how to unify. No analysis of the enemy's role in that, just the problems with us. Well, if you believe like that, then you're saying that something is wrong with us. And if you believe that, you hear it all the time, crabs in the barrel. Like, nothing is stopping us from moving forward except ourselves. And if you believe like that, and I know there's people listening that believe that, because I hear it all the time, what you're saying underneath that is you don't have any faith in us. And if you don't have any faith in us, we're never going to move forward. So the problem is not the people you're talking about, crabs and barrel. The problem's you. The problem is you. You got to start engaging in a process where you can gain faith in your people. Because if you don't have faith in your people, you don't have faith in yourself. There's no way you can have one without the other. It's just not possible, because you're a product of your people. You didn't produce the people produced you. So if you don't have faith in the people, how are you going to tell me that you have faith in yourself? That's just not possible. You're a manifestation of the people. So this is what we have to do, is engage in these processes of mass organization. Take the study processes seriously, participate in them, build organization. And this is how we put ourselves in a stronger position where we can begin to see in our horizons one unified socialist Africa, a free and united Palestine, a liberated Ireland, a liberated indigenous Western Hemisphere. We can begin to see that. And then once we can see it, because we prepared ourselves, we can begin doing the work to make it happen. But we just want to tell you again, we appreciate each and every one of you for joining today. Thank you for coming. Tell a friend. Next week, we're going to have a very critical topic. We're going to be talking about organization versus mobilization. The difference between organizing work and mobilizing work. Most people don't understand that. It's a very important distinction. And Shakura and I are going to be talking about that next week. And so we want to invite you all to join us for that discussion Sunday, December 20th, 4 to 5 PST. And between now and then, don't let these people convince you to spend all your money that you know you don't have on something that's not real. If you want to show and demonstrate respect for your loved ones, you should be doing that 365 days a year. You shouldn't need the capitalists to tell you that December 25th is the day that you do that. You shouldn't need that. And if you do, then that speaks to the work that needs to be done. My sister, I realized this contradiction when I was 5 years old, when we were living where we lived. And my father, I asked him, how does Santa Claus get in here? Because we didn't have no chimney. We lived in a, tenement building. And he said, well, I leave the door unlocked. And my father would beat our behinds if we left that door unlocked, even for 2 minutes, because somebody was subject to come up in there and do something. So I knew as soon as he said that, I knew Santa Claus was a lie. I knew then, but I had to confirm it. So I went to my sister, who's 2 years older than me, and I said to her, so do you think Santa Claus is real? And she said, you're so stupid. Do you think a white man is coming around here with goodies? They'd strip his sleigh clean. And that's when I knew, yeah, she's right. That's right. There's no Santa Claus. So don't let these people put you in a debt situation. You know, save your money, build around it. Figure out creative ways to build with your children. This child on here with me, Shakura, has never celebrated Christmas. She can correct me if I'm lying to you. She's in her 30s. She has never celebrated Christmas. And I guarantee you, she is as healthy psychologically and spiritually, if not more healthy than your kids that you had around Christmas trees every year. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. Come back next week. Forward ever, backwards never. And please enjoy the rest of your Sunday.